right now. We're back. We're back in the studio. God bless you today, January 24th, 2021. Shout out to my brother, Pastor Emeritus Thomas Burrell Sr., to Pastor David Harris of Greater Page Temple. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. And the Lord bless you with many, many more. I just thank God that for my family and for all of the connections, friends and family, far and near and dear to my heart. Thank God for another day. I get up in the morning. I find myself these days getting up, I share over and over. I'll get up in the morning and I sit with God every day. It's become a spiritual discipline. And, it's a discipline, so it's a commitment, and it's a commitment I keep every day. This morning, I got up earlier, like 5:30, Normally, it's like between 6:30 and 7:30, but I got up at 5:30 today, and it's just so blessed. It's so blessed. And I find that my spirituality, my connection with God is deepening, the revelation is growing, and what's happening, the benefits are just, beyond words. But every morning when I get up, I'm finding myself thanking God for another day. And one of the reasons for that is that there are so many deaths. They're just everywhere. It's like I'm overwhelmed right now, and I'm like, this is not my imagination, but and I'm talking about deaths that are related to COVID, but then deaths that are not related to COVID, and it just is overwhelming. So every day I get up, I never assume that I can't be in the number, and I thank God that I'm not in the number, that He's given me purpose and He's given me life. And I thank Him every day for it, in a special way, with a new consciousness. I thank Him for it, because I can honestly say to you, my listeners, that I don't think I can remember living in a time where there was so much death that I was aware of. Of course, death is a part of life, and, people come and go and die, are born and die as the cycle of life. But I can honestly say that I can't remember a time in my life where I experienced multiple deaths of people that I know of in such a concentrated way, in back to back to back to back, over a protracted period of time, and it's escalating. Like, there was a lot of deaths in 2020, but now we're in 2021, and it seems to me the deaths are increasing, not decreasing. And so there's always a response, there's always a reaction to what's going on in life. One of the thoughts that I had about it, and then I asked this question in house church today. Ecclesiastes 3, that says there's a time and a season for all things. Is the time to mourn, the time to weep and the time to mourn, individual or corporate? And the responses that I received in house church was that they're very much corporate. They're very much individual, but they're both. And so I don't know if I've ever lived in a time of corporate weeping, corporate mourning, where the masses are mourning, the masses are weeping this long, to this intensity. Now, I can visit history and I can see instances. This immediately made me think of the devastation of the Holocaust, the devastation of war, other pandemics. It made me think of times I've read of but not ever experienced. I never expected to experience a pandemic in my lifetime. I'm just being honest. I remember sitting on the 101 freeway going west into the valley. And I was sitting in back-to-back traffic, and I looked to my left on the freeway in the morning, and one of the drivers was reading a book. Yeah, Rashid, they read in traffic in the fast lane. And another driver to the right of me was texting. And I looked ahead of me. Somebody was eating. And I looked behind me, and somebody was changing lanes, like that nobody was on the freeway but them. And I remember thinking, I'm stuck in this mess. I am stuck. I would be so frustrated in that traffic. When I tell you, I don't miss sitting in traffic. Like I was sitting daily, every morning and every evening. I knew what it would be. I had traffic down to a science. I knew that if I got on the freeway after a certain point, 5 minutes after, I could forget it. But if I made it 5 minutes before, I could get in a flow at a certain speed and get home by a certain time. It was that redundant. It was that regular. It was that structured. It was that oppressive. It was that tight. The schedule was tight. My life felt tight. My life felt stuck before the pandemic, where I would sit in that traffic, and then I would go to work, and I knew, sign in and get on the computer, ADP, sign in my time, then go get my coffee, go get a breakfast burrito from downstairs on the 5th floor, come back up, start going through my emails, go through my voicemails, start my day. And it was like that every day. And I'm telling you, I'm telling you, my listeners, I'm telling you, I remember thinking, I'm only making enough money to keep me stuck in this. I wasn't making enough money to get me out of it. I was paid enough money to keep me stuck in that. And I remember the thoughts I had about it, thinking that this is horrible. What's going to happen, or what can happen to break me out of this? Because, I'm working on that job, not because I want to, but because it was a necessity. Now, yeah, I had the ministry on the side. I was doing things, but, the regular money that keeps the bills paid, and the car note and the rent and all of this stuff and the mortgage and all that, that was that routine that was maintaining those expenses. And the side money it would dwindle in. But the regular money was tied up in the routine of the tightness. And then the hardest part for me to process was when I was doing all those multi-million-dollar loans and collateralized loans, and I was closing the loans. So I knew all the terminology and provisions, the legal negotiating terms and all of that, and I knew all the math and all the money connected to that. I knew what the seller's profit. I knew what the buyer's advantages were. I knew all of it. And I'm sitting here making it happen. Stuck. I'm stuck. But I'm sitting here making it happen. It's happening with my signature. It's happening with me being the notary and me being the person, sign here, do this, do that. And I had to turn my brain off because I'm getting paid like I'm the light bill. I'm not getting a cut. I'm getting paid. I'm overhead. And the fact that I wasn't getting a cut of all of the multi-millions that I was making happen for someone else, I had to turn my brain off at that point, because I didn't have, as an individual, maybe somebody else has it, and I say, good for you and great, I wish I knew you because I would have asked you for advice. But me as an individual, I didn't have what I needed at the time to get myself unstuck. And I'm just being transparent. Hopefully my transparency helps somebody who's listening. So when the pandemic came along, because this is my point here, when the pandemic came along, then we're going to get into the lesson. And let me say this, because this is part of the lesson. Today we're going to talk about grief and different aspects of grief, because we're in grief, and I believe that we're corporately in a season of grief, okay? I think we're in Ecclesiastes 3. But when the pandemic came along, and it shook me, I was shook. It was the earth was moving up under my feet. I was sent home along with the rest of the coworkers to work virtually. This was unheard of, and I didn't know how long we were gonna be able to sustain that and stay in business, being in the legal arena, and now we're almost a year in, but it was a bunch of unknowns. But I'm gonna tell you something. The first week I went home, I was stressed and relaxed at the same time. I did not miss being in that traffic. I didn't miss it. I was relieved. I was relieved to be able to wake up naturally. I had anxiety. I had anxiety about not knowing what to expect. But I was relieved from knowing what I was bound in, the routine I was bound in, if that makes sense. And so now that I'm almost a year in, and my life has dramatically changed, and I want to say for the better. For the better. I feel like those children of Israel in Exodus 3 and 4, where God tells Moses to go tell Pharaoh to let my people go. I have seen the affliction of my people and have come down to loose the grip of oppression on them, that they may worship me. That's what happened to me. Because my routine had become had an oppressive grip to it. An oppressor will shut you down and shut you up. And it had an oppressive grip. And when that grip got shattered, I was free to feel again. I was free to make choices. It gave me choice. And I realized that I could stress eat. And for me, that would be a go-to. For somebody else, it would be weed. For somebody else, it'd be the internet. You know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to say that. For somebody else, it would be maybe sleeping a lot. Escape through sleeping. Whatever the vice you choose to cope, it could be a go-to. I could make it a go-to. So I could choose to stress eat, or I could choose to be honest with myself. And I chose to be honest with myself. And by me being honest with myself, I saw that, okay, if I don't do something different with this anxiety, it's going to overtake me. So I, growing up a good Pentecostal, decided to fast. And I started the fasting regimen. And then the fasting led me out. The rest is history. The fasting just exponentially changed my spirituality, changed my life, and then I ended up in therapy, and from therapy I was introduced all these other things, good things start happening, and it reminds me of the scripture. I think it's in John. Beloved, I wish above all things that you prosper, even as your soul prospers. It seems there's a parallel between my soul prospering and my financial situation changing and prospering, because that's when the doors open for me to teach for Jake's Divinity School, Vanguard University, and on and on and on and on. And so last year, this time, I had less than half of what I've been able to save. I've more than doubled what my savings. You, it's a miracle to me. It's a miracle to me. So I'm saying to you, for the suffering, there was a suffering that came in it. I definitely had a suffering in it. I've lost so many loved ones, so many friends. But I think the secret for me was the anchoring myself in the discipline. The spiritual discipline anchored me, because from that anchor, I could hear God and obey God. Because it's not enough to just hear God, you have to hear and obey, because the reward is in the obedience. And it unlocked doors, and it unlocked advantages that I did not foresee. Now the advantages are really starting to pour in. So it's almost like the best of times was the worst of times. You know what I'm saying? Although the grief is great. The grief is growing, but it's not just grief. It's not just grief. And then I want to say something else about it. Grief has a way of distorting reality. Grief has a way of distorting reality. That's a segue into our lesson today. I want to go to Psalm 13. I'm just going to read it to you from the Message Bible, okay? And then I'm going to go into a story, because there are so many people right now who are shut down emotionally from grief. So, but they're people of faith. They're people of faith. They believe in God. They honor God. They love God. But grief has a way of challenging your faith like nothing else I know. So here the psalmist says, long enough, God. Because this is the thing. There are people out here who listening to me. Not only are you losing loved ones from COVID, and you're losing loved ones, you're suffering friends, and church acquaintances and friends, and all of that. But some have lost jobs, so you have the grief of that. Some have their homes have split up. You have the grief of that. Some have taken on the unhealthy coping. The unhealthy coping choices. I want to watch my words, because I don't want to sound judgmental. So I'm kind of watching my words here. But I want you to know I get it, and I'm not condemning it. I really am not. Because if that's where you're at, that's where you're at. And so you got to work your way from there. So when you're confronted with overwhelming circumstances, you're going to choose something. And you can choose well. You can choose, well-meaning self-care and wellness. You can go into discipline. There's a safety in discipline. Or you can go into addictive type of dynamics where the addiction is going to give you enough heaven to keep you in hell. But you do have a trade-off. You do get some benefit in that. It's just that it's self-destructive in its core, in its nature. So there's some people who have multi-layered grief, complex grief. Grief, hear me good now, grief is exacerbated by unresolved conflict. And that's why people will say, so-and-so is on their deathbed and they want to make peace. They'll call Uncle Henry. I want to apologize. I want to make peace. Well, why did they do that? Because they don't want unresolved conflict, because they know they're dying and they want to get it right. And then if their theology supports it, they don't want to go to hell. They want to fix it. They want to fix things. They want to fix things and make peace. The humility sets in, and they want it fixed before they leave here. And so they try to resolve conflict. And resolving conflict is always a blessing. So grief has a way of grief has a way of leveling issues. But in the environment that we find ourselves in, grief is on a global platform. It's on a national platform. It's on a city platform. It's on in individual homes. Because the city government is the state. The state is impacted. The cities are impacted. Your individual homes are impacted, and then individuals themselves are impacted. Every level. It's visiting every level at one time, all at once. So you're wondering why you have so much anxiety and so much stress. And then on top of the anxiety and stress, there's multiple unexpected deaths. And oh my God. And you're just so grieved and you can't find your way out. So let's go to the Word of God. Instead of, we're not going to pick up that weed. We're going to go read the Word. Okay? Because we're going to make a healthy choice. So here the psalmist is saying here, long enough, God, because this is to somebody who's serving God. You've ignored me long enough. Psalm 13. I've looked at the back of your head long enough. I've carried this ton of trouble, lived with a stomach full of pain. All that anxiety that is in the gut. Long enough, my arrogant enemies have looked down their noses at me. I got people looking at me arrogantly, judging me, thinking, oh, look at the preacher now. Look at the reverend now. Look at the singer now. Look at the psalmist now. Where's your God now? Where's your success now? And you feel that God's ignoring you too. Take a good look at me, God. My God. I want to look life in the eye so no enemy can get the best of me or laugh when I fall on my face. I've thrown myself headlong into your arms. I'm celebrating your rescue. I'm singing at the top of my lungs. I'm so full of answered prayer. So this poetry, this psalmist is saying, he's kind of doing it like a juxtaposition, comparing the human side of his complaint versus the faith side of his complaint. The first stanza is long enough, God. I'm tired. I'm feeling abandoned. I feel like you're ignoring me, and it's causing me a ton of trouble. My stomach is full of anxiety, and on top of that, my arrogant enemies are mocking me and laughing and looking down their noses at me. And then I take a good look at me. He's going into petition. Take a good look at me, God, my God. Remember, you're my God. You're my personal Savior, my God, because I want to look life in the eye. I want to, if you, God, step into this and give me a word, I will have the confidence to shoulder up, to gangster up to this situation and to look it straight in the face and not crumble. You make the difference, because you, Lord, being my God, when you speak and you look at me, no enemy can get the best of me or laugh when I fall. You see how he's going more and more? So he goes from his personal experience, and then he goes into his experience with God. And then as a result of turning to God, he's not talking about the situation. He's talking about himself. He says, as a result of his faith in God and his relationship with God, and going to God and turning to God instead of food, to God instead of weed, to God instead of the internet, to God instead of just codependent relationships, unhealthy relationships, all this stuff. Now, because I've thrown myself headlong into your arms, God, I'm celebrating your rescue. You will rescue me. You'll put the singing back in my lungs, because I'm full of answered prayers. This is Psalm 13. Psalm 13. I want to go to the story of Jacob. I want to go to Genesis. I think this is Genesis 40. I didn't write down exactly. Joseph's story starts in Genesis 37. I'm in the Joseph story today. It starts at Genesis 37, and then it progressive to, I think, 39, 40, 41. It goes like that. Okay. But it starts at, says, this is the story of Jacob, and the story continues with Joseph, who was only 17. Now, I like that, because I told Kennedy, my granddaughter, who was 16, I said, Kenny, one thing about it, there's not an adult around you that can advise you, because none of these adults have been a teenager in a pandemic. So you are writing the script. Your style of being a teenager and what you've had to experience of being a teenager, none of these adults have ever had to. They went to proms, and they had friends, and they went to the beach with their friends and the park with their friends, and hung out after school with their friends, and sleepovers, all this stuff. And you get none of you quarantine, honey. You're a virtual student. You're being denied the experience, the traditional high school experience. You're being denied that because of bigger circumstances. Joseph was 17 when his world changed dramatically. He was only 17. He was helping out his brothers in herding the flocks. It sounds kind of normal. And his brothers were half brothers, because there was 4 women that Jacob, his dad, was married to. So Joseph, it says that Joseph brought his father bad reports on his brothers. Strike one. You can't be no tattletale. I grew up in a family with 8 boys and 3 girls, and my mother used to call us on a regular basis tattletale. We go, Mama, Tommy did this and that. You're a tattletale. She didn't put up with it. Here it is in the Bible. Joseph tattletaling on his brothers. 17 though. I'm just saying. It says in the 3rd verse that Israel, or Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he was the child of his old age. Strike two. How you gonna be a tattletale and then your dad favor you? For real? Yeah. You can see how this is starting to boil. Okay, here we go. He made him an elaborately embroidered coat. Strike three. Now you getting your father's favor on another level where he's expressing the love and you're walking around in this fancy coat that your father made you. I mean, it's like provoking his brothers to a rage because, you know, you brat, you're 17, you're one of the younger ones, first of all, and then you got the father's ear and the father's heart, and then you go tell on us. Or you just keep your big mouth shut. I mean, you got to have siblings to know what I'm talking about. When his brothers realized that their father loved him more than them, they grew to hate him because they wanted the father's love. They wanted the validation as well, and they were entitled to it. They hated Joseph so bad they wouldn't even speak to him. They wouldn't even speak to Joseph. Now God gets involved. Joseph had a dream. Do you know you can't control your dreams? You can't control your dream. Oh, tonight, I think I'm going to dream about, the lottery. I'm going to come up with some numbers. I wish. No, it doesn't work like that. Joseph had a dream. Now, this dream was a divine dream. And when he told it to his brothers, because Joseph seemed to be calloused, you telling it to people that you know hate you, and he seems like he's kind of blonde at the roots, as they say. That probably is a politically incorrect example, but you know what I'm trying to say. Joseph was calloused or unaware of the contempt that his brothers had for him. He was kind of like mindless, like Mr. Magoo. That was a better example. And so when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said, listen to this dream I had. This is a dream. He said, we were all out in the field gathering bundles of wheat. All of a sudden, my bundle stood straight up and your bundle circled around it and bowed down to mine. What? His brother said, so you going to rule us? You going to rule us? You going to boss us around? This is what your dream is telling you? Then they hated him more. Now, Joseph didn't have any control over the dream he dreamt, but he didn't have to go tell his brothers who was already hating on him. But he didn't have good judgment. He was immature. We're still talking about grief. Hold on. And you see grief throughout the story because you see his brothers are grieved. Joseph is grieving his brothers. His brothers are grieved because the father is dissing them for choosing Joseph over them. There's grief throughout this story because grief is not always a physical death. Grief can come as a result of the disappointment of a strong expectation or desire. Grief can come as the unfulfillment of a personal need, emotional need. There's grief all throughout this story, okay? And so his brother said, you're going to rule over us, you're going to boss us around. They hated him even more ever because of his dreams and the way he talked. And the way he's talking is not just the dreams, it's the way he talked about the dreams. Then Joseph had another dream. And told this one also to his brothers. I dreamed another dream. The sun and the moon and 11 stars bowed down to me. When he told it to his father and his brothers, his father reprimanded him. Well, you're not responsible for what you dream. But now I can see how Joseph will have grief. Why you getting on me? I'm just telling you what I dreamed. But his father reprimands him for it. What's with all this dreaming? Am I and your mother and your brothers all supposed to bow down to you? Now his brothers were really jealous. But his father brooded over his business. His father pondered his son, who he favored, who he made that coat for, his pick. His father, whose name was changed to Israel, who had a relationship with God, pondered his son's dreams. Family system was whack. The family system was whack. The family system was dysfunction. Grief, and more grief. The family system. Look at this word, the word of God. The family system was whack. Here, Jacob was the third father of the faith, period. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob received the covenant promises of God. And this is what Jacob, this is how he acts as a human being. This is how he's acting as a father to the descendants of Abraham, who would actually bring descendants into the earth to become the children of Israel. Because Jacob's name was divinely changed from Jacob to Israel. So Israel could be an individual, Israel could be a description of a people, and Israel also became the description of a geography. The promised land. Israel. Israel's huge. Yet he was a father who by his choices split his family. He acted like he couldn't see that his brother, he was pitting one kid against the next kid, showing favoritism. And then God does the same thing. Yeah. Joseph running his mouth, Joseph the tattletale, Joseph the one getting favor and taking the perks and using it as pride to himself, and God chooses Joseph. God is something else, isn't he? God is something else. There's some hope for you and there's hope for me. Are you the Joseph in your family? Are you the scapegoat? Are you the person that your backstory is one full of whack family stuff? I didn't say that in the scholarly way because I got to say it in the way that you can get what my point is. Are you the one? Are you the different one? Are you the one that the blessings of God is on you and on your life, but your personality and your character lacks? It lacks. It has a whack to it. It's lax and it's whack. Are you that person? Can you relate, Joseph? Can you relate? And anytime there's whackness, yeah, I made it up. It'll end up in the dictionary one day. If you are full of whackness, then you're going to disqualify yourself from God. And you manufacture grief. But anytime there's a bunch of whackness, there's a whole lot of grief around. There's a whole lot of disappointment. Somebody got let down. It's not fair. It's not fair. It's whack. Why did the good person die and the devil still live? Now, you know who I'm talking about. I don't have to call no names. In your family, you say, why did you let my dad live and take my mother? Why did you do that? When my mother was a godly person and my mother had the influence and she could have helped the whole group, but you let the devil live. Why? Why? And why'd you leave me here in the midst of the mess to be damaged by it with all the whackness? Why? 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 That why? God, my God, why? Is grief. Human grief. And I need to talk to you from a real place today. And I talk to you, this will most likely become a series, but I'm talking to you today to help you to see that what's going on with this pandemic and what's going on with the circumstances, all of the myriad of circumstances right now, the scenario after scenario after scenario, I'm trying to help you see from the Word of God that is not new. That's not new. God's hand was on Joseph. Let's go further into this grief story. His father pondered. His brothers, I'm in the 12th verse. His brothers had gone off to Shechem, where they were pasturing their father's flocks. That's the money. Israel said to Joseph, your brothers are with the flocks in Shechem. Come, I want to send you to them. Joseph says, I'm ready. So his dad sends him to his brothers to check on him. He said, go and see how your brothers are in the flocks and bring me back a report. Because he knew, he's the one that's going to chirp, chirp, chirp. He's the bird with chirping. He's going to tell the story. So he sent him off to the valley of Hebron to Shechem. A man met him as he was wandering through the fields and asked him, what are you looking for? He said, I'm trying to find my brothers. Do you have any idea where they're gazing their flocks? The man said, they've left here, but I overheard them say they're going to Dothan. So Joseph took off and tracked his brothers down and found them in Dothan, another place. And they spotted him off from a far distance. They say, they look like that might be Joseph. By the time he got to them, they had cooked up a plot to kill him. Whoa. Yeah. They saw him coming. They said, this is our opportunity. This is the way they're going to deal with their grief. They're going to commit murder. So the brothers were saying, here comes that dreamer. Let's kill him and throw him into one of these old cisterns. We can say that a vicious animal ate him up. We'll see what his dreams amount to now. I mean, really? Is that serious? Yeah. They were that hateful. They had that much jealousy. They had that much envy. They had that much contempt for Joseph. Reuben, the oldest, heard the brothers talking and intervened to save him. We're not going to kill him. No murder. Go ahead and throw him in the cistern out here in the wild, but don't hurt him. Reuben planned to go back later and get him out, take him back to his father. When Joseph reached his brothers, they ripped off the fancy coat he was wearing. Why would you wear that coat? Joseph, really? You wore that coat? You didn't have another coat? Poor judgment. They grabbed the coat. They grabbed him. They threw him into the cistern. The cistern was dry. There wasn't any water in there. So they left him there to die. They sat down and ate their supper. They were gangster, they were mad, and they were asserting their grief. This is gonna answer you, dreamer. You think you better than us? You're greater than us? We then look now. What does the Psalm 13 say? Now can you put Joseph's cry into Psalm 13 now? They arrogantly looked down on me. Looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites on their way from Gilead. That would be their cousins, Esau's descendants. Jacob and Esau were twins. Looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites on their way from Gilead, their camels loaded with spices, ointments, and perfumes to sell in Egypt. Judah said, brothers, Judah is the third or fourth oldest. Judah said, because it was 12 brothers. Judah said, brothers, what are we going to get out of killing Joseph and concealing the evidence? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites, but let's not kill him. He is, after our brother, our flesh and blood. So the brother said, yeah, I guess you're right. So by that time, the Midianite traders were passing by, and his brothers pulled Joseph out of the cistern and sold their brother for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took Joseph with them down to Egypt. Let me hit you with that again. Joseph is grieved. Joseph is afraid. Joseph is bullied because he was an emotional bully. Joseph was, I guess I never really looked at it like this, but Joseph was kind of like an emotional bully because you have the advantage. If you have the advantage, you need to be humble. You don't need to be a brat. You don't need to be arrogant. You got the Father, you got the natural, God's love, God's choice, God's favor, God's hand, God's choice on you. And you have your natural Father's favor, his choice, his hand on you. What need then would you have to frustrate your siblings because of your privilege? That shows a lack of character. That shows very strong immaturity and lack of understanding about the purposes of God for his life. And he caused grief with it, and now he's getting the grief he caused back. He's getting it back because his father sends him to his brothers just to check. They're over there in Dothan with the flocks. Bring me back a report of how they're faring, how they're doing. But instead of Joseph being able to do that, he gets ambushed by his own brothers. So this is a betrayal. So this is a picture of 10 guys against one. It might even be 11, but I doubt if Benjamin was in that number. But for the sake of me not speculating, I'm just going to go ahead and say Benjamin was with him. So Benjamin being Joseph's natural brother. I just don't see Benjamin being in that. You guys can figure that out. Maybe hit me on the chat and tell me whether or not you think Benjamin was a part of the brothers who sold Joseph. I don't think he was. He could be, but I don't think he was. But I do know for sure those other 10 were. Those other 10 brothers were. And you have 10 men against a 17-year-old. Wow. Hey. You have Joseph's father who had no idea he was sending Joseph to a death sentence by the hand of his own brothers. It's brutal. It's cruel. This is cruelty at its height. It's kind of like the pandemic, unexpected grief. I wonder when Joseph started discerning, thinking, uh-oh, trouble. I wonder what he was really, the fear, the anxiety, when he started getting roughed up, roughed around. See, he had been used to getting away with it. He was used to getting away with it. They took it. And those dreams, he didn't know they was going to hold those dreams against him like they did. This is the thing. Were the dreams true? Yes, they were. Yes, they were. Every detail of those dreams were accurate. Was it in his best interest to share those dreams? I know the end of the story. And so because I know the end of the story, and some of you know the end of the story, we know that God has a purpose. God had a purpose for this grief. The divine plan. This was the divine plan happening unaware. Well, here you go, Doc. You always go back to that divine plan. You always go back. That's right. Because the divine plan, I think it's either the 12th chapter of Genesis, the 15th, or the 17th chapter of Genesis. I think it's 15th. Your descendants, Abraham, will be in Egypt for 430 years, and when the fullness of the Amorites be revealed, until the fullness of the Amorites be revealed. This is the beginning of that happening. This is the beginning of it. That was something that was going to happen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later. This is the beginning of it right here, this story. And it happens in family confusion. It happens in betrayal. It happens in unfairness. It happens in dysfunction. It happens in immaturity. It happens in great grief. Great grief. I always ask, do you know your spiritual heritage? Do you know any of the backstories of the faith that was imparted into you in your life? Who are the people who laid hands on you, prayed for you, taught you, and imparted the faith to you? What is the backstory? What is their backstories? Because this is creating a backstory. When we go further into the series, it's going to be this moment. It's going to be this moment right here. This is the moment. This is the moment that Joseph is going to have to try to choose how to deal with that grief. This grief is going deep. It's going deep. It's going deep because Joseph didn't see it coming. His daddy didn't see it coming. His brothers are acting out their rage and their grief, their disappointment, the injustice. The brothers are acting out. And they take Joseph, strip off his coat, put him down in a dry cistern to die, even though Reuben was going to double back. They didn't know that. And Judah speaks up and says, Lord, let's sell him. You going to sell your brother to strangers? Yeah, we're going to sell him. You're going to sell him as a slave. And of all places, who picks him up? Who picks him up? Midianite traders who just happened to be passing by. They sell Joseph for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took Joseph with them down to Egypt. Down to Egypt. What did the prophecy say where they would be? Abraham's descendants would be? They would be in Egypt. But all of the fulfillment of the prophecies of God are happening through a season of disillusionment and grief. It was time for Joseph. His life shifted. And he was vulnerable. He didn't see it coming. It was a sucker punch. He was used to his coat. He was used to his daddy. He was used to bugging his brothers and making his brothers mad and get away with it. He was used to his everyday life. I mean, this boy was 17 years old, and he was just used to doing what he do. Later, Reuben came back, 29th verse. Later, Reuben came back and went to the cistern. No Joseph. He ripped his clothes in despair. Despair, grief. Beside himself, he went to his brothers. The boy's gone. What am I going to do? They took Joseph's coat, butchered a goat, dipped the coat in the blood. They took the fancy coat back to their father and said, we found this. Look it over. Do you think this is your son's coat? Deceiving their daddy, knowing they sold their boy. Jacob recognized it at once. He said, my son's coat. A wild animal has eaten him. Joseph is torn from limb to limb. And then here we go. Jacob tore his clothes in grief, dressed in rough burlap, and mourned his son a long, long time. His sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but he refused their comfort. I'll go to the grave mourning my son. Oh, how his father wept for him. Sometimes it's time to cry. And guess what? It wasn't even true. That's why I said sometimes grief is distorted. It wasn't true. They let their father believe it was true. It wasn't even true. I'm going to pick this story up next week. We'll see what happened to Joseph. God bless you. Sometimes it's time to cry. Dr. Z gets it. Go ahead, release those tears. I love you.